Never trust a character who explains a crime by announcing someone was an interior decorator. The enduring appeal of this exchange lies in its perfect collision of misplaced bravado and utter cluelessness. One character solemnly reports that a man killed 16 Czechoslovakians, followed by the triumphant revelation that the alleged menace was an interior decorator. The immediate rebuttal, his house looked like shit, lands with the elegance of a brick through a window. Yet it remains one of those lines that refuses to age. The humor persists because the scene showcases a level of confident nonsense so pure it deserves preservation in a museum. Declare a man an interior decorator, shout it with conviction, and suddenly the entire room is expected to nod along as though this isn't an astonishingly deranged interpretation of events. At moments like this, one can almost hear an exasperated voice begging some higher power to intervene. Even more entertaining is how often the underlying joke goes sailing over viewers' heads. Many never notice the original claim was simply that the man worked for the Department of the Interior, a bureaucratic detail that, through sheer interpretive acrobatics, mutates into a glamorous artistic profession. The transformation is almost as impressive as the solemn invocation of geopolitical disasters, like casually tossing in the Cuban Missile Crisis as if it were just another colorful anecdote at the dinner table. It is this blend of misplaced certainty, misheard facts, and theatrical outrage that gives the moment its lasting charm. The comedy doesn't merely land, it detonates. Are you someone who questions why Christopher's worst behavior keeps getting excused as character complexity? Christopher Moltisanti's emotional range has long been misread as depth, but a closer look reveals something far pettier and far less flattering. The famed moment when he learns his girlfriend is pregnant is often framed as touching vulnerability. In reality, the tears have nothing to do with impending fatherhood, and everything to do with the fact that the child isn't Adriana's. His grief is so transparent he even blurts out her name before scrambling to bury the slip beneath a familiar barrage of misogynistic insults, as if calling her damaged goods might somehow rewrite the past, or disguise the fact that he'd trade the living woman in front of him for the one he helped destroy. Of course, this is hardly surprising behavior. His moral compass has always spun like a cheap desk toy. The moment he murdered a television writer for the high crime of being irritating made it abundantly clear that sensitive artist was merely the costume draped over a violent maniac. Beneath the brooding exterior sat the full catalog: drug addiction, woman beating, casual murder. He only managed moments of restraint around other wise guys, not because he possessed self-control, but because he lacked the nerve to aim his tantrums upward. The contrast with truly volatile figures, Eugene smashing a bottle over little Polly's head being the obvious example, only highlights how selective Christopher's bravado really was. His defenders often insist he was tragic, misunderstood, or otherwise struggling against the regularity of life. In truth, the only regularity was his capacity for self-pity. Whether he was mourning Adriana, dodging accountability, or fretting that he couldn't pass a drug test, the tears always came for the same reason. Christopher wanted the consequences of a grown man without relinquishing the impulses of a petulant one. Kelly Moltisanti enters The Sopranos with all the fanfare of a background extra accidentally stepping into the frame. One moment, the audience is immersed in Christopher's spiraling grief and guilt. The next, a woman with the narrative weight of damp cardboard appears to announce she is pregnant. It is a character introduction so abrupt, it feels less like writing and more like the writers needed a warm body to stand approximately wife-shaped. Her relationship with Christopher possesses all the chemistry of a tax audit. No spark, no tension, no development. Just a hasty elopement that seems designed less for romance and more for damage control. The shotgun wedding reflects nothing so much as Christopher's eagerness to slap a moral bandage over the gaping wound of his betrayal of Adriana. It is a performance of adulthood, the illusion of maturity. Even he doesn't realize the act is hollow until the pieces begin to fall apart. Kelly, meanwhile, becomes the ultimate embodiment of the safe rebound. Adriana had been brought fully into Christopher's world, deeply, dangerously in the know. It cost her everything. Kelly, in contrast, is kept blessedly oblivious, a generic neighborhood woman with traditional credentials, mob-adjacent parents, and a willingness to apologize for not insisting on a condom. Her acceptance of blame for her own pregnancy is delivered with such resigned sadness that it becomes the only moment in which she threatens to resemble a three-dimensional human being. Her importance lies almost entirely in her unimportance. She is the placeholder Christopher grabs in his frantic rush to rewrite his narrative. Wife, baby, respectability, a semblance of normalcy. It's an assembly line family, constructed with the same emotional investment one might bring to purchasing a microwave. And while she seems to love him with earnest devotion, waiting alone, calling into the void, raising their child while he indulges in drugs and infidelity, none of it registers. She is a prop in his redemption arc, not a partner in his life. Some viewers even note that scenes emphasizing Christopher's attempt at genuine adulthood, such as Tony and Carmela attending a celebratory gathering, were removed, perhaps because they threatened to make this marriage look like more than it was. A convenient facade slapped over unresolved trauma. Kelly's narrative function is simple: to show how quickly Christopher attempts to outrun the ghost of Adriana. She appears abruptly, serves her symbolic purpose, and melts back into the margins. One could request a prequel chronicling how they met, but given the depth on display, it might be generously titled The Many Whores of Caldwell, a joke that underscores how intentionally unremarkable the character was designed to be. In the end, Kelly Moltisanti is not bland by accident. She is bland by design. She is what remains when a man desperate to grow up chooses the quickest, safest, and least complicated route. No passion, no partnership, just the illusion of progress. Are you trying to figure out why Patsy Parisi's bland little chores reveal the entire moral rot of the mob? The closing moments of Amour Fou, Season 3, Episode 12, offer a surprisingly domestic portrait of Patsy Parisi. Grocery bags, a phone call to his wife, and the promise of returning home with frozen ravioli. It is an almost aggressively ordinary image, which is precisely why it lands with such force. After all, only minutes earlier, this same man had delivered a chilling threat to Gloria Trillo. He didn't snarl, posture, or grandstand. He simply treated intimidation as another small errand in an already busy afternoon. For men in this world, violence is rarely a moral crisis. It is a task, no different in tone from picking up stuffed shells or getting bread. Junior Soprano's trial testimony captured it cleanly. Murder can be ordered with the breezy detachment one uses to order coffee. Patsy demonstrates that same casual fluency. This, of course, is the cruel joke at the heart of the scene. The people drawn into proximity with these men, people like Gloria, who mistake danger for excitement, absorb the damage. Meanwhile, the men themselves glide back to the comforts of their sanctioned lives and sanctioned partners. Inside the hierarchy, wives are granted social legitimacy. Everyone else is disposable. It echoes the dynamic of university, where Ralph sweeps from killing a pregnant dancer to making polite chatter with Rosalie, all without a single disrupted hair. The episode's final image, a close-up of Patsy's unremarkable face as he discusses dinner, only sharpens the unease. It's deliberately anticlimactic, almost mundane, inviting the question, was Gloria already as good as dead the moment he walked out her door? The scene doesn't declare it. It doesn't need to. The banality speaks louder than any overt threat. In the end, the show doesn't just expose the brutality of these men, it exposes how easily that brutality coexists with their cozy domestic routines. The horror isn't in the violence. It's in how comfortably they live alongside it. Are you wondering why seasons 5 and 6 feel different from the show's golden era? The Sopranos has the kind of trajectory most prestige dramas would kill for. A strong start, an unstoppable middle act, and a late-stage stumble, only noticeable because the bar was set ludicrously high. Even on a third viewing, the series reveals fresh layers, particularly in James Gandolfini's performance. His work remains a masterclass in controlled volatility and understated comedy, the sort of singular achievement that continues to embarrass the notion that television acting is somehow the lesser cousin of film. The show's peak lands squarely in seasons 2 through 4, the era when the writing is at its most muscular and the dialogue feels simultaneously off the cuff and razor-engineered. Season 1, for all its virtues, still plays like the sketch of an idea, destined to become richer, meaner, and far more confident. By the time the series hits its stride, it's fully full-bodied, less tentative, more fearless, and steeped in the thematic density that later imitators mistake for mere gloom. Season 2 stands out with almost unfair ease. Richie April's entrance alone electrifies the show, a reminder that old school can be both terrifying and darkly funny. His run-ins, accidental or otherwise, underscore the series' talent for making brutality feel inevitable rather than sensational. Even his throwaway barbs land with quotable precision, the kind of lines that lodge themselves permanently in the cultural attic. Seasons 3 and 4 then deliver Ralph Cifaretto, chaos incarnate, and with him, some of the sharpest narrative arcs the show ever attempted. This is the period where The Sopranos stops being impressive television and becomes a cultural text people write dissertations about. Season 5 still carries that electricity, the last high before the plunge into the bleak, introspective descent of Season 6. And yes, by then, the show begins to display the faint symptoms shared by every long-running series. A certain awareness of its own myth, a creeping flirtation with trope. It never derails the experience, but it does signal that even giants eventually look in the mirror. Still, the remarkable consistency, those recession-proof qualities that never seem to waver, cements the show's legacy. From the performances to the dialogue to the quietly devastating humor, every season holds its ground. But the heart of The Sopranos, the purest distillation of what made it seismic, remains in that mid-series run, seasons 2 through 4, where the writing sings, the characters combust, and the series becomes the definitive modern tragedy it was always meant to be. Never reduce Carmela's decisions to desperation. They were rooted in ambition. Carmela Soprano's tolerance for Tony's endless infidelities is not a mystery. It is the entire architecture of their marriage. Her outrage only ever ignites when the inevitable becomes inconvenient. When a Gumar dares to breach the perimeter of the McMansion and dial the home phone. The cheating itself is not the offense. The offense is the administrative sloppiness. For years, she embraces a policy of strategic blindness. The affairs are an external nuisance, something that happens out there, like road construction or the price of gasoline. As long as the mistresses remain in the appropriate off-site facilities, the arrangement holds. But once they infiltrate the domestic sanctum, Carmela's denial evaporates, and she demands her version of restitution, an apology wrapped in jewelry, real estate, or tuition payments. A violation of terms is met with a renegotiated contract, not a reconsideration of the marriage. The justifications surrounding her patience are as predictable as they are revealing. Tradition dictates that divorce is unthinkable. Preserving the nuclear family is practically a cultural commandment. The mob wife role, complete with its perks and degradations, is considered an occupation unto itself. Fidelity is not in the job description. Silence, stability, and impeccable home management are. There is also the transactional nature of their partnership, which everyone quietly acknowledges. Tony provides the palatial home, the private school opportunities, the never-ending parade of consumer comforts. Carmela manages the household, raises the children, and maintains the illusion of respectability. In that equation, his cheating is practically a line item. Her tolerance is, in effect, part of the cost of doing business. Even the supposed alternative suitors, respectable men like the Wexlers and pharmacists of her parents' dreams, cannot compete with the intoxicating allure of being married to the neighborhood alpha, whose money arrives quickly, even if not entirely cleanly. Yes, Tony insists he's old school, the kind of man who surely has his girlfriends tested, as though that alone renders the betrayals gentlemanly. And yes, there are rare exceptions in the social circle. Bobby Bacala's alleged monogamy gets cited like some mythological creature cited briefly in the wild. But these anecdotes do not alter the broader ecosystem. Mob husbands cheat, mob wives endure. Everyone plays their assigned part. In the end, Carmela's recurring indignation is less about morality than about boundaries, and less about betrayal than about etiquette. She can tolerate collateral damage, but not contamination of the living room phone line. And as long as Tony continues supplying the kingdom, she remains its queen, even if the crown must occasionally be polished with gritted teeth and selective hearing. Stop calling Blundetto misunderstood. He was perfectly understood and still made terrible decisions. Blundetto earns his infamous animal moniker with almost comic efficiency, eliminating Joey Peeps, then swiftly dispatching Billy Leotardo and nearly Phil Leotardo in the same breath. He demonstrates a level of feral commitment that would make even his colleagues reconsider their career paths. His rampage on behalf of Angelo isn't subtle, but subtlety was never part of his skill set. His appeal lies partly in the performer behind him. Steve Buscemi brings that unmistakable off-kilter presence, equal parts weary, sharp, and funny-looking, as one might politely phrase it, which gives Blundetto a strangely sympathetic menace. There's also the lingering irony of the character's attempt to wipe the slate clean, as if a few platitudes about brotherhood could counterbalance a lifetime of catastrophes. And of course, the inevitable observation stands. Blundetto and Mr. Pink are, indeed, the same man, two sides of one perpetually anxious coin. Sadly, in Blundetto's case, the line, "It's sad when they go young," lands with the kind of grim understatement that defines his entire arc. Never call Gene unlucky. Luck has nothing to do with walking straight into the trap you built yourself. Gene's downfall inspires a certain reluctant admiration. After all, it takes real commitment to be this catastrophically short-sighted. The rules of his life were made painfully clear from the moment his finger was pricked. Membership in Tony Soprano's world was a one-way door. "If you have any doubts or reservations, now is the time to say so," Tony warned. Gene marched through anyway. Years later, he resurfaced with the brilliant proposition that he should be released because he had money, and because Joe Bonanno once pulled off something vaguely similar. It was less an argument than a cry for help. The tragedy is that Gene wasn't merely a soldier who might have slipped away quietly. He was a made man, bound to an oath he later treated like a gym membership, something one can cancel with a polite notification and an inspirational new life plan in Florida. And while he was pitching his retirement fantasy, he was also cooperating with the FBI, apparently assuming federal agents would happily sign his permission slip to exit the state and abandon proximity to Tony. The level of naivete was almost performance art. One might imagine that with a couple $1 million tucked away, the sensible move would be silence, patience, and discretion. Keep Tony satisfied. Keep the feds calm. Keep one's head down long enough to eventually disappear, perhaps not into Florida real estate brochures, but certainly out of immediate danger. Others had done far more with far less intelligence. But Gene's problem wasn't geography. It wasn't even the FBI monitoring him, though that alone should have discouraged dreams of a beachfront retirement. His problem was the inevitable collision between his actions and their consequences. Cooperation with law enforcement ensured that jail, exposure, or a bullet were the only endings left. Remaining alive would condemn his family to the fallout of his double life. Prison would brand him a rat for all to see. Florida had nothing to do with it. His final act, bleak as it was, came from recognizing the trap he had built, the damage he caused his family, a son drowning in addiction, and a future carved into two options: death by others or death by his own hand. In the twisted calculus of his circumstances, he chose the only path that allowed those he cared about to step away from the wreckage. His story wasn't pathetic because he couldn't get to Florida. It was pathetic because he lived in a world where Florida was ever pitched as salvation, and because he believed it. Subscribe for more.